Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the paranormal. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. This week, we welcome back to the show Chiron Armand. Kai is a currently traveling shamanic practitioner, usually based out of New York. He joins us today for a wide-ranging chat covering Wetiko and how to get our heads around it, matching meaning and experience, soul retrieval, and mediumship. Kai, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me, Gordon.
Oh, you're very welcome. It was we met in London. Last time you were East Coast, currently on the West Coast, I believe.
I am, and just last night I was with a friend. We were driving up the coast right out of Berkeley through Marin, and it's amazing how much that area reminded me of the Barrows that we went and explored while we were in England. I just kept getting nostalgia for that time that we got to spend together. So now you're on the other side of the world, the other side of the world.
Yeah. We like to roam. This is good. All right, so there's a whole bunch of stuff that I think, looking at 2018 and the various challenges that we're either facing on a macro level and also on an internal level, kind of working out how you think with and how you situate yourself with the fourth turning. Let's call it that. This point in the timeline that we're in. And we've been chatting a little bit over email for the last 5 or so weeks. And one of the main concepts I think we should open our discussion with, because it's very useful, is Wetiko. So Kai, what am Wetiko?
I understand Wetiko to be a non-local, cannibalistic, vampiric entity associated with sort of malignant narcissism and, frankly, psychosis. And it's not a psychosis that I think in the way that we Westerners usually imagine mental illness to be, or psychosis to be. Frankly, mental illness is, at least from someone who is connected to social justice communities, mental illness is a word that is being used quite broadly, quite often. I don't think I know many people who do not consider themselves to be mentally ill in some ways. And most of the people I know have taken on a certain level of personal power through identification with being of non-normative mental capacity. I also, as a medium and shaman, and sometimes someone who wakes up at 3 a.m. because XYZ deity wants to speak to me, am certainly of someone of non-normative, mental capacity. However, I believe that oftentimes people are talking about the ways in which unhealed trauma has shaped the way they move through the world. Very true. Sorry?
This is very true. And when people have, and it might not even be a self-diagnosis, but it's also been my observation that they have reached this identity component of themselves based on a dodgy epistemology, based on a sort of very materialistic mind equals brain medical model, which is, I'm the son of a psychiatrist, is absolutely true. There are medicines you can take that alter brain chemistry that improve people's lives. That's fine. But as you kind of point out, I think the worldview from which these diagnoses emerge is insufficient, and often leads to, as you were just saying, going, are you sure you guys are you sure you're talking about this as a brain dysfunction rather than something more like what we talk about?
Agreed completely. And it's from that same worldview that leads us to not label absolutely and obviously unwell individuals like Harvey Weinstein of the recent Hollywood abuse of women, debacle. That is, when we say recent, I mean recent as in sort of just, now people are really talking about it. Obviously, this has been going on for decades, not just Harvey, but the Hollywood mechanism. And Trump, every time an article comes out about Trump, that's like, is he an egomaniac? Is he a narcissist? Let's make sense of how he doesn't seem to have any adult emotions, possibly going. And I'm just thinking, like, what kind of worldview would have us? This isn't news fit to print. This is obvious. This is it is our cultural insanity that allows us to continue. I mean, obviously, it's our cultural insanity that for voting him in the first place, but it's also our cultural insanity for us to keep pointing and saying something's off here. I wonder what's going on here. Is rain wet? You know?
Yeah.
And from an indigenous perspective, and I use the term indigenous perspective because that's really where the word Wetiko comes from. Wetiko is a Cree word, the Cree peoples of Turtle Island here, now known as United States of America on this land. And Wetiko being what they saw as literally a cannibalistic entity of vampirism. And so that when the Europeans arrived, they sort of responded in this way of like, so much of what we do is what we do ceremonially and ritually, and what we find across the world in indigenous cultures, from initiation into adulthood to grieving rituals to community rituals of being intact, community staying intact, is about not only about, but is a damn good antidote for Wetiko growing, amongst the people, because once someone is incredibly Wetiko ridden, their ability to be in community, their ability to actually serve the greater good, is possibly all but lost, because the malignant egophrenia has taken over, and they're all about themselves. And where in the world do we see that working in any ecosystem, in any sustainable community, etc.?
No, exactly. And so what we're essentially talking about, to oversimplify it, is a spirit virus. So it's a virus that is a spirit. And the Trump Weinstein versus an individual who might be listening to this show, I guess, not axis, what am I looking for here? But if you look at those two at the one time, you see two things that I think are a failure of the predominant model. It's this sort of overdiagnosis or over-medicalization on an individual basis of conditions that, whilst very real, probably have better ways of approaching healing than SSRIs or what have you. So you have the over-diagnosis on an individual basis, and you have a complete inability to think with the context of how Trump and Weinstein perpetuate and arrive. And why we talk about, this is interesting because I said this to Alex on Skeptico as well, to which he agreed. Trump isn't the smoking. Trump is the cancer. So you're talking about the collective insanity as to how he got voted in. Well, it's a sick worldview. It doesn't mean the other candidate was horrifying in her own way. This one, but you look at it and go, he's the cancer. This is what happens if we can't have ideas and understandings of things like Wetiko. We don't actually find out where the challenges are.
Absolutely. We if our worldview can't even hold the reality of what's happening, we're pretty fucked.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's talk about some high profile examples of this then, and how we might maybe think better with these ideas. Let's sort of run the understanding of Wetiko through some sort of modern stuff. So I'm going to give you three options. Kai, let's just say horrible people. Are horrible people A, never possessed, B, always possessed, or C, sometimes possessed and show working?
It's a really good question, because I've been working on a bit of like a percentage gauge. Even my friends and I have started talking about, on a Steve Bannon level of possession, where would you put this person? When you look at Steve Bannon, for instance, at least, maybe it's just because I've been practicing mystical arts for so long, but I look at this person and obviously the things that are coming out of this person's mouth and what their values are, to me, lend themselves toward a sort of regressed refusal to be engaged with the possibilities of diversity and progressive movement forward as a whole, all of us together. And to me, that smacks of, frankly, possession. And I think that even brings up the idea of what is possession. I think that people still think of possession and they think, oh, possession is when a demon possesses you and your head turns around 360 really fast. Not possession necessarily as in an unresolved ancestor, someone who died in your bloodline and never crossed over, who had these addictions, who had this worldview, who had this tick, this nuance, this issue. They are seeing you, and because they don't have a body and can't work out their shit, when they had the chance to move on, didn't move on, well, you look like a great vehicle for them to work their shit out through. So now you're picking up some weird thing that wasn't really your thing before. That weird thing can be anything from, alt-right neo-fascism to, Heineken, not labeling anything as good or bad, but just talking about how, when I'm talking about possession, I'm talking about layers of possible influence that are not native to you and do not serve you. Obviously, there are helpful layers of influence that are not native to you that do serve you. This is why we talk about helping spirits are helping you. This is why we talk about deities or astronomical or astrological influences that it serves you to get closer to, because these are close to your true nature. And this is to replace so that you can be more in your true nature, so that Uncle Harvey, who was a Confederate soldier and still thinks that XYZ kinds of people really suck, doesn't pollute your mind.
Well,
and obviously there are
yeah, this is what thinking with Wetiko, I think, is so useful because it does push out at the limitations of the worldview that we were raised in. And I know people, obviously, who listen to this show wouldn't at all, for the most part, identify with that worldview. But it's nevertheless baked in there, and it is an eternal kind of ongoing challenge to pick and unpick and work out which parts to fix and salvage and which parts to remove. Because, as you said, like, possession isn't just demons. And even in the West, we do have, thanks to the likes of Carl Jung and so on, the notion that ideas are alive. So there are all kinds of things. And maybe that's, although Wetiko is, in fact, its own person, there are ways we can think of, like, you can be possessed by empire, and even people who you think would be perfectly progressive, like Bernie Sanders, are possessed by empire, and his foreign policy with regards to the Middle East is as despicable as the things that come out of Bannon's mouth, because he wants to annihilate Arab children. He doesn't realize he's doing that. He doesn't think that's what it is, at least I hope not. But you look across and go, these guys are being, mostly men, but the Western political class is swamped with various possessions, ghosts,
yes,
ancestors, empire. And what's so helpful, I think, in thinking with these ideas is that we have a framework. We have a framework to understand and place ourselves in. Okay, well, how do I feel about the world and what I can do in it if I think about it this way?
I'm still hung up on the ghosts, ancestors, empire. What a great 3 words next to each other. Geez, you're absolutely right, and that's part of the reason why the task ahead of us is so intense, because it's about changing minds, not necessarily about the small things, but about the big things, the way we see the world, and through a materialistic worldview. The materialistic worldview is what has enabled us to see individuals. I keep coming back to Harvey and Trump just because they're the ones that stand out in my mind the most right now. And as you said as well, it is mostly men who are showcasing these qualities on a huge level. But it is our materialistic worldview that enables us to look at someone like Harvey and say, oh, he's, a healthy person. Because his bank wallet because his wallet is fat. It's what was one of the driving forces behind our ability to vote in Trump. Well, he's rich, therefore he must be smart. Never mind that he was explaining to the American public repeatedly how his willingness to be a horrible person is what made him rich. The fact that he one monopoly, the fact that he had these resources, said, well, he is well. You having resources meaning being well. It's absurd and insane from an animistic, closed energy system point of view, us all just being on this finite earth. And it's insane even on the local, on the smaller community view. The idea that having and not giving or contributing or trying to share gifts is not posited above the hoarding of resources. Hoarding. We actually have a show here in the U.S. that's about hoarding, and no one watches the show and thinks these people really know what they're doing. These people are really well. We watch it frankly, as Americans, to laugh at unwell people. But if those resources are not physical objects but money, suddenly we need to vote this person in. We need to give this person leadership positions. That's insane.
You mentioned the animist worldview and gifts, and that's a really good. So, if you vote for, I mean, he essentially got in, as far as I can tell, because the people who voted for Obama twice and had nothing happened, threw a spanner in, right? That if you look at where he swung, it was that. And to some respect, I have that appreciation. But if you think, as you said, if your analysis of why he might be good at running a country, they weren't very good options in 2016, let's be clear, is, he has loads of money, and he openly said, I have loads of money because I'm an asshole. It's a failure of ecosystemic thinking, because it's okay, so what he's saying is he bullied money out of other people and now he has lots of money. Well, that is how, particularly the American economy, but the Western economy works, which is you have, fuel in your cars and a strong dollar, because the other side of that is destabilizing countries across the planet and putting large private companies in, forcing them to buy bonds and extracting the resources. And you think, well, that is not ecosystemic thinking. When you look at the stuff that you have, this is for anyone in the West, you go, this is not a gift economy. And like an ecosystem, if you're cutting down one half of the forest to, start pointless fires in the other half of the forest, you think this is not out of balance. This is the kind of stuff that Wetiko does and attracts Wetiko. It's like you stay out in the cold and get a cold. You live like that, you get Wetiko.
Absolutely, and also I've been starting again. I've been engaged for the past couple of years now on trying to understand what leads people to become possessed by Wetiko. Obviously, we're all possessed by Wetiko to a certain extent. There's a certain percentage of which it's just a part of us living in the West. I had the experience recently of driving from LA to Tijuana. And I will say, as someone who has been really deeply engaged in this research, sometimes on a more personal level than other times, when I say deeply engaged, I mean deeply engaged, really making sense of and mapping this entity, I will say that as I crossed the U.S. border into Mexico, I literally started breathing differently. And I spent the next 2 days in Tijuana with a friend of mine. And the experience I had was so overtly, wow, the U.S. is really Wetiko Nation. Like, we are the child of so much European trauma that was experienced in the old world. And now there's so much that we have not resolved on this land. And for this non-local entity that exists in the field of consciousness in general, and some people it particularly peaks. I could also say at that moment, wow, in some places it also particularly peaks. In the U.S., that's certainly for sure. And we were also, you mentioned before, the issue of mostly men. Well, it's certainly with a Wetiko mindset that drives the level of mass violence that we have perpetrated by men on this land. I do believe there is a close relationship between unhealed trauma in general, which we all experience, lack of initiation, which we all have here in the West, a lack of initiatory rites that help us to step into adulthood and stop living out our childhood wounds. But I believe that there are wounds that are particular to men that help to exacerbate the spread of Wetiko mindset across that part of the human species.
Well, absolutely. You could make the case, I don't, but you can, it might be useful for people listening to think with, that the Wetiko virus is a mutation of essential male DNA, because it's the mutated version of hunting. It's the mutated version of protecting or providing resources for a family or a tribe or something. It's the mutant version of that, which is I want all of everything rather than I am providing. And well, so I don't think that's what Wetiko is. It's a useful way to understand that spectrum of potentially why it infects men more than others. And we spoke about initiation last time you were in the show, so I've got a variant initiation question for you, which is, are we being initiated? Is this what's going on? Is this the fourth turning? Is the fourth turning the West's initiation?
I think that Paul Levy, author of Dispelling Wetiko, would say yes, that this energy is coming to the surface for us to really look at it as a part of our collective healing. I would say that I'm not there yet. I would say that I know that we are all being initiated on individual levels all the time by life, or at least life is trying to initiate us. It's very easy for us to just hold on to our pillows and say, no, 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 and ride it out for a really long time and avoid that which is really trying to take us to the next level through trauma, through loss of sense of identity, etc. Are we all being initiated? I would say that it's not a hard no that I would offer. It's more of that's what I'm investigating. It's what I've been investigating, especially in terms of understanding what the Earth's plans are. That's been a part of my process recently. Looking at the Earth, what the Earth itself has been through, and what the Earth's hopes and dreams are. In a way, from that angle, I would say, yes, we're all being initiated, partly because we're riding this fierce, beautiful, incredible beast of a being known as, planet Earth. And it seems like she's initiating herself and going through some powerful initiatory processes.
Yeah, sure. I'm probably with you in the I'm not fully there yet. The book's great. I've read it. So if people are interested in Wetiko, go and get it. But we met in London. So you've been to London. When you said the US is Wetiko Nation, it is, except it's the host. So it caught it. And it was previously, particularly in London. It's still in London. And that's where I'm not sure. I think maybe some of the speculation that it's when American writers generally write about the West, they're writing about America. The virus, although it's a US, it's an American concept, is older than the US. And that's where I'm not sure. There might be some use in looking at the fourth turning as an opportunity for it. So the fourth turning is you're all standing in the River Jordan, but it is still up to you to kind of get dunked. And that might be where we can say, are we all being initiated? No, but the opportunity to be so has never been, hasn't been closer in the last 100 years, is maybe a way of thinking of it.
Absolutely agreed.
Cool. All right. That was good. I just wanted to put that in there and go, you've been places and I've lived places as well where you kind of see the antibodies of where the virus used to live. And London still is that. It still has more millionaires and billionaires than any other city on earth, and more than the G7. I mean, more than G20 minus 7. So there are more millionaires and billionaires in London than the rest of the world that isn't the G7. And that's quite an infected host.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. So if people are on board with this, if they're like, okay, I'm ready to start thinking with these ideas and see what happens. One of the first things that's going to happen if people are doing this through dream work or journeying or active imagination or any of this stuff is you're going to have to very quickly learn to speak a symbolic language. And one of the next topics of conversation as a result is how we match visions and meaning. So, can we do that? Can we do that on our own? How do you do so, Kai? And let's talk about that. Let's talk about what happens when you go in the journey of, okay, I'm going to start thinking with these notions and thinking with the living universe, and it doesn't send you texts, right? Like you need to understand a symbolic language. So let's do that.
Well, there's firstly just the aspect of realizing that you don't know shit. We don't know shit. We simply don't know anything. We are so far away from, and culturally, from a collective understanding of what's actually going on, that if you are new to beginning to explore what's actually going on, it's so important to suspend disbelief and be open to the possibilities of what might come through and beginning to track what's coming up in the field of consciousness. And that is, from the thing that stood out at that bar that you saw on the counter, and it was like, oh, that's interesting. And then it showed up, when you got home on your Facebook, and you're beginning to track those things, those objects that are literally showing up with a big, in bold lettering throughout your life, to the synchronicities, and recognizing that, sure, we have our own hands in the pot and we are manifestors and creators, but we are not in control of this whole thing. This is a feedback system. This system is speaking back to us. And I, for one, am someone who is very comfortable with paradox, that this feedback system is me. This feedback system is outside of me. Sure, whatever. It's Sunday morning. Who cares? For me, it's about engagement and trust that I'm being led somewhere for some reason.
That's good. I like that. I like you open with, because this is generally how I do the discussions if they come up at barbecues or so on. You open with you don't know shit, because it's very easy if people, and this is an attack on people who are listening to this going, okay, well, I'm going to start doing this. I'm going to start engaging symbolically or symbol linguistically with the universe. The first thing you have to realize is we have a terrible concept of what an idea is in the West. Like it's broken. Materialism can't understand ideas. There is no way in the official paradigm that matter can have any kind of interiority. So nevertheless, your entire life is symbolic. So they're wrong. The idea that we have to justify, because you said we don't know shit, we have to justify this experience, which is how all humans, except for 5% of the population in the last 200 years, have lived forever. We have to justify it against something that doesn't even get out of the shop, how it's that broken, is step one. Just be like, this isn't weird. It's weird that you don't do it. It's weird that it is not accepted rather than is accepted. And then, as you say, that's step one. Destroy the worldview that says you don't do it. And then after that, it is engagement, because you know how to do it. It's built into being human. And the way you is kind of like, I use this example in a book, but it's sort of like teaching a dolphin to recognize xenocards or teaching sign language to a chimp. If you have recurring images or motifs, interact with it, engage with it, follow along with what it means, and then wait for the universe to respond. And that's your Close Encounters of the Third Kind climax. That's what you're doing. This is how you begin with, I guess, matching visions and meaning, surely.
Absolutely, and it one cannot just take your well, you can, but it's very dangerous to just take your epistemology and just set it on fire. I mean, that's to just set the ground that you're walking on fire. The whole story that you're living your life on, set it on fire. I had a teacher who she would mention the position we're here in the West is the position of trying to repair a plane while it's in the air. And that it's, to me, I find that just so appropriate. We're trying to shift something, our lives, our understanding of what our lives are, while they're moving forward. So Western initiation, which doesn't really, for most of us, make space for 2 weeks in the woods to really be dismantled by a helping spirit and be completely transformed from there, and then come back to the village and say what we saw, it's going to happen like you lose your job and your marriage and, or one of your children dies or your spouse. It's going to happen like something that you are told should not happen to a human being. Well, here you go. As it's happening, and if you want to survive, you're going to have to work through this and make meaning from it. I will say that in the connection between symbolism and Wetiko, because I would say I was kind of granted the privilege of having a very acute personal experience of Wetiko, kind of as initiation. I spent a few years having to interact with people who I didn't fully understand the level of trauma that they had been facing, and how that was guiding their decisions and their ideas, and their relationship with myself. But my own work with symbolism and trance states over the years really prepped me so that I could accept the information that was coming to me symbolically throughout that time. One of the dreams I had while I was very much in the throes of experiencing and learning about Wetiko was literally that a friend of mine and I were in the vicinity of a very, very, very beautiful man who had long hair, was a cult leader, and was deeply diabolical. Deeply diabolical, had caused so much trauma and pain, and he and I needed to rig some sorcery to catch him in the act and block his power. And we had come up with this idea about how to do that. We had this plan, very, very suspense thriller. And just as we were about to assert our plan, he looks at us. He knows. And now we're fucked. And then I wake up. And it's one of those dreams that really, some dreams are, I don't really know what happened. There was a bird, there was a child, there was a woman. And they're those dreams that you never forget because they stand out so much. And that was one of them. And that was probably about a year to a year and a half before I was able to match the word Wetiko to the experience I was having at the time. It was sort of one of the first lead-ins that there was something deeply diabolical that was in my periphery, and it was something with eyes. It was something that could see, and my attempts to sabotage it in the known ways that I could go about it would be thwarted.
Yeah. That smells like a true dream to me. That is... And a lot of people, this is the case, I guess, for life in general, but a lot of the times, however much you want it to be otherwise, the best course of action is sometimes nothing. Like this is, Wetiko, for all its dangers and risks, is a thing that exists. And maybe it does exist so that we learn to avoid it and learn what it is and what we shouldn't be and so on. So it's not something you go into battle and defeat. And I actually struggle. I want to widen that out a bit because we're going to come back to, I think, an important point, which is when a bad thing happens to you. You use some examples of kind of how initiation may manifest in the West, and they were all bad examples. They were good examples, but they're all bad things that happen. Divorces, deaths in the family, and so on. Now, what we aren't good at, and this is why I wanted to talk about matching visions and symbols and meaning, is when you say that this event comes embedded with meaning, which is neurologically correct, phenomenologically correct, and so on, it doesn't remove the fact that it's a really shit thing. Like, it's really bad that happened, that you lost a family member. To say this has meaning doesn't mean you killed your grandmother, or she died because the universe had to send you a message. And we aren't good at having that polyvalent, multi-level understanding of how our universe works. Because if you get out of generally Western culture, you have an understanding that bad things happen and things also are embedded with meaning. One, it's not either or. And I think that's maybe one of people's biggest barriers around that. Let me tell you, I'm getting to this and I want your opinion on it. Because as you were talking, I was thinking about the development of, say, Protestant theology in Europe, coming out of the Middle Ages into the early modern period. And what emerged there was, which found its fullest and creepiest expression in kind of US megachurches. And it's a sort of Trump variant, really, which is if God loves you, your life is good. And good things happen to you. And if bad things happen to you, it's because maybe God doesn't, or it's the result of sin. And I just wonder if we have in the back of our heads a double reason why we are not very good, worst in the world, in fact, at trying to understand that an event, an initiation, a trauma can be more than one thing at once.
Well, yes, we have a, at risk of offending a lot of people, and I will say, to cover my own ass, that I grew up as Protestant Christian. And there are things about which I still draw tremendous amount of encouragement and faith from. I grew up as a Bible-believing, Bible-thumping Jesus freak, and I say Jesus freak because that's the title of the album by DC Talk that I loved as a teenager. Not as a hit at anyone. Like, no, truly, Jesus freak. Ready to be a martyr for Jesus. I will say that there is nothing more. There are a few things to me more debilitating spiritually than the worldview that, particularly the theological worldview, God worldview that this tradition gives us, because we are honoring, frankly, a deity who expresses seriously Wetiko-like values. If we look at the Old Testament, not from the eyes of children who are being told, simply pay attention to this and believe this. This is what a good God is. And we look at it with any humanitarian viewpoint. This is a sociopath. This is a sociopath who's running around the world harming everyone. And we then ask ourselves why we are so forgiving of abuse from men in our world, why we're so forgiving why we've all got daddy issues. We've all got daddy issues. And look at Big Daddy kill everyone. Look at, if you look at, this is, frankly, this past year, and I have, I've had wounds going back to adolescence that I've done a lot of healing around in terms of families' views of myself and being queer, etc., and my own interests. But there was a renewed layer of investigation into Protestant Christianity for myself over the past year due to the experience I was having acutely with Wetiko and Wetiko-ridden people around me. And one of those was really looking at the ways in which this person in this book is so about disconnecting this group of people, the Old Testament Hebrews, from the world around them, disconnecting them, and flexing his power pretty openly. There's a section where I think even in if you see the movie Prince of Egypt, Pharaoh is, Moses approaches Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go." And he's like, "Oh, it's so good to see you, brother, but I'm just not going to do that." That's actually not what the scripture says. The scripture says that Pharaoh totally was about to let the Hebrews go. And then Yahweh hardened his heart in order to prove himself. And then Pharaoh said, "No, I'm not going to let these people go." Why'd you have to harden his heart? That's some Wetiko-ass shit right there. That's some kind of malignant egophrenia that I truly believe has been sort of passed down onto us as a culture, in terms of Western culture. The other piece there being today, when we look at Protestant Christianity, to me, there are few better vehicles for the spread of Wetiko than a religion that literally tells its followers that the world around them is of no consequence. Literally, pay no allegiance to this world that you are living in. Pay allegiance to a far-off world, the kingdom of heaven, this far-off world that exists elsewhere, not here, in some other time dimension. Down to the local element of, from an animistic standpoint, don't be engaged with your culture. Your culture is inherently bad, because culture really, at any stage of the game, is at the intersection of humans and the land. Whether that is in the most seemingly exotic indigenous context from a Western point of view, people farming and working with land spirits, to Nas growing up in Queens and Brooklyn and the kind of hip hop that he writes, and that kind of experience or environment. To me, it's animism at every layer. And to literally, as myself, to be growing up as someone who was told anything worldly is bad, anything of your world is bad, anything of your culture is bad, everything about you needs to be expressing allegiance to some place that does not exist. Wetiko, to me, thrives in that environment. It thrives in that being in that disconnection, and the ways in which disconnection support a lack of trauma healing.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to see that you just look at, particularly as it manifested into the sort of prosperity gospel type way of seeing the world in the US or in Wetiko Nation. The chief acolytes of this being are essentially the ones that have the most money or the allegedly nicest lives. Who knows what the wives and the kids are getting up to behind the church after school, or after church. And this kind of way I wanted to have the discussion that way, which is realize that you are interacting with the universe symbolically, and realize that there are multiple meanings or multiple layers to an event, good or bad, that happens in your life, to some of the very specific reasons why we weren't raised in a way that is amenable to this. So there's some damage and stuff that we can work out. So this is the next bit then. What's soul retrieval, Kai?
So it's interesting being out here in Berkeley, California, where I'm currently hanging out with friends and doing some events. Apparently, some people have an idea. There's multiple meanings of soul retrieval. And a lot of my friends out here are familiar with the term, have experienced some form of soul retrieval. I can only speak to soul retrieval as I've experienced it for myself, as well as the way that I practice it, which is the idea that we are taking back, literally retrieving, some part of ourselves that was lost due to trauma in the past. Often childhood trauma. Not always, but often childhood trauma. And the idea is that we experience soul loss when some part of us believes that we're not going to be able to move forward. We're going to die. This experience that we're being presented with is literally going to kill us. And if we sacrifice this part of ourselves, there's a chance we might be able to continue moving forward. It's not a conscious decision to sacrifice some part of ourselves. It's simply how we're made. It's simply like, oh shit, abort, abort mission. And as we move forward through life, we might not realize that some part of us is still existing in that time period, in that moment, still standing in that kitchen with its jaw dropped at what mommy just said to us about ourselves or about our family.
I like that metaphor.
We don't realize.
I'm just going to use a technological one because this is important. As you said, it's a sustained loss, and we use it to. So it's kind of like having your phone on charge and off charge. It's how the phone continues to the end of its life. If it's not on charge, it's going to use bits of battery. And if you're trying to do something, or if you do an extreme thing, if you're watching lots of videos on it, but like it will. if people are listening to this and they don't know what soul retrieval is, you do think about some of those events, or the time that you shut up when someone said something really cruel to you, or that you laughed because you didn't want them to say something else cruel, or whatever it happens to be.
Yes.
Like, that's the bargain. Like, it's when you say, I don't want this to happen anymore, so I'm going to laugh and pretend I enjoyed your witty joke. And that's a little bit of the soul battery going. And if you're listening to this, it's happened. It's happened to you. Sorry, I just wanted to use the battery thing before I forgot.
No, that is so apropos. And I would say that I've never met anyone who does not have soul loss. I believe we live in a culture that is rampant with soul loss. And thing is, and this isn't to come against anyone's ideas of their own courageousness or wellness, but so often people say, and even I've said throughout my life at different points, well, but I got over that. And the truth is, we don't get over anything. We really don't. We might have found coping mechanisms. We might have built an exquisite scaffolding over the thing and around the thing to help us survive, or help that part of us or connected part of us continue to thrive. But we're really not over anything. If a wound has been sustained, if something has been lost, we either put that thing back and we either heal the wound, or it festers. And we can cover it with lovely perfumes and colognes and uncrossing and cleansing baths even, and protection talismans and all of these things. And that wound is still a gaping hole in our souls. And one of the things that happens when we have a gaping hole in our souls is not only is there that structure, that identity or psychic structure that's lost, but frankly, gifts are lost. Aspects of ourselves that are expressive and connected to other realms and beings are lost. I can't say how many soul parts my helping spirits and I have retrieved that literally, like, I'm talking to this 7-year-old version of yourself, and she's excited and thrilled about this idea, and you're like, wow, that is exactly how it was when I was 7 years old. I was obsessed with sunflowers. And I asked the 7-year-old, what gifts do you bring back with you? And she reaches into her pocket, and there's various deities and helping spirits that she's pulling out. She says, well, since you left me behind, I've been hanging out with this tiger for the past 30 years. And then you realize, oh shit, I used to have this stuffed tiger. It's that deeply connected to it's that place where we have forgotten who we are because we've lost connection to who we were, but the spirit world is literally still waiting for us, like, come back. It reminds me almost of that meme where that guy dies and goes to heaven and says, so you're Dan. Toto has been waiting for you for the past 40 years, and the little dog runs up to him, and this idea that there are things that are waiting for us on the other side. And I absolutely agree with that. In the disenchanted worldview of adulthood in the West that says, get a good education, get a job, get married, and die, there's no room for all the magic, literal magic, that you are, and that you can get back, that you might have lost from childhood. But from an indigenous perspective, it's vital that you get those parts back to piece yourself back together.
Yeah.
And that includes your own magic.
Absolutely. And one of the things that has always struck me is, I guess, one of the dysfunctions in the materialist worldview that we live in is that psychotherapy shouldn't work. It doesn't work in a materialist framework, just talking and remembering a thing, but nevertheless it does. Nevertheless, we have and this is no shade on psychotherapy or whatever, nevertheless we have in Western culture a version of soul retrieval that maybe has the fader slid down to 5, and you should certainly still do that if you're getting value out of it. but there are other ways of being in the world that can slide that fader back up to 10, and it's sort of what soul retrieval is. But as you say, there's different definitions around the world, but it is if you widen it out sufficiently, it is a universal experience and a universal essential, if that makes sense. This is what humans have to do to continue and transform whilst they're in the physical, if that makes sense.
Agreed. And the way I perform soul retrieval is in a mediumship session. Sometimes my helping spirits might simply make it known there's a soul part that needs to be retrieved. We'll go and get it. I might perform them in journey. I often journey for clients into the spirit world and return and give them an audio narration of what I discovered. But I remember reading about a form of soul retrieval in the Philippines in which a medicine woman, upon a family coming to her and telling her, our child used to be so jovial, but is now depressed and listless and just sits for a long period of time by themselves, that medicine woman might say, give me a toy of the child's, and we'll go out to the ocean and call out to the spirit of that child that has been lost for that spirit of that child to come back. The idea is, and sort of holding up this toy and saying, you're loved and valued, and come play, return. And that's, I'm always looking at the intersection between embodied folkways and things that I might do in a trance state in journey, and they're so deeply connected, because one of the other things that I'm doing when I am bringing back a soul part for someone is I'm asking, what do you need this adult to do to bring you back? And what that child needs is some form of play, some form of, and when I say play, I mean engagement that adult might not be up for, but if you want this part of yourself back, recognize that the part of you that might not be up for this is the part of you that has become the very trauma that led to this soul loss in the first place. And that's what parts want. They want to make sure that you're not what made them leave in the beginning. Have you become your own abuser? And we live in a culture where we absolutely do become our own abusers. We become our own worst enemies. We meld ourselves to fit that which has maimed us so that we cannot be maimed again. And that's part of the psychosis. And this child part wants you to, play with some trains, sit outside and observe the birds, connect with the earth, stand in front of a group of people and give that speech. And that's going to be a part of the process of integrating them back, because my retrieving them is really only, the first step. Going back to what you said about, there's been an ongoing thread throughout this conversation about men, and you mentioned psychoanalysis and talk therapy, and we've also been talking about Wetiko. These are all connected also because there is something especially cerebral about Wetiko, and there's something very much in the way that it, one of its primary weapons is through what I would say air element ways of moving through the world. Most recently, politically in the United States, we've been having the experience of learning that there are alternative facts, learning that one can lie ad nauseum and still reap rewards. My own acute experience of Wetiko included me having a very powerful experience of both being gaslit over time by someone and then literally having the spirit world tell me in a very incredibly arranged, synchronistic event, you are being gaslit. Because that's the thing about being gaslit. You don't know you're being gaslit, and your own sanity starts to disappear. Sanity also being related to the mind. So I say all that to say that embodiment and the ways in which soul retrieval invites greater and deeper embodiment is also an antidote in that direction.
Yes, we'll have to I have some books I might suggest after we stop recording. But you mentioned mediumship. Speaking of recording, we were chatting about this before we hit the go button. And I'm a fan. Now, I have a question. I want your opinion on something. Why is it... What are the reasons, as far as you can tell, why it is less popular than I think it should be in, shall we say, like Western occult worlds?
That's a damn good question.
Right?
Wow. I would say that there is still a lack of trust in one's personal experience. In fact, so much of, when I say Western occult worlds, which I have a strong understanding of folk magic, and I would say I have a strong understanding, ever-growing, of shamanic practices and of African diasporic worldviews. I would not say I have the strongest understanding of Western occult traditions, although I do have some background. But I would say a recurring theme I have experienced in Western occult traditions is this focus, frankly, on physically manifesting a spirit, literally spirit evocation, and getting to that place where I have brought the subtle into manifestation, even in terms of magic. And obviously this flows through the folk magic world as well. I did it. I have brought the subtle into manifestation. Now, obviously, I think most of us aren't trying to be Frankenstein and trying to bring grandma back into manifestation. Grandma who might have passed away, but I think most of us aren't trying to be Frankenstein. So it almost brings up the question of what is the value in letting that which is unseen remain unseen. And I think that part of that is, again, a lack of self-trust in one's experience with the unseen. I think that there's also the muddled history of spiritualism and spiritism from the 1800s and what that left us with. I mean, Houdini himself had a pretty fucked up experience with mediumship that was very, triggering and would make anyone walk away from the idea thereof and not, never turn around and go back. That's what I have to offer.
No, that's good. It's interesting. I expect you're right that it is a almost undervaluing of the unseen in Western occultism, which is not just a materialism, although it's clearly a factor in the 21st century notion, but it's there in the history of the grimoires before we got to materialism, when we're still in a kind of typically Catholic living universe kind of thing. So that's interesting to me. The other bit that I just can't shake is, first of all, in the 19th century, it was competition for the likes of Theosophy and Crowley and so on. So a lot of people inherit some biased media when it comes to understanding spiritualism in particular, right? A lot of people inherit some biased media because they, Blavatsky and Crowley and so on look down on it. And this is something I said to Connor at the beginning of the year about the general Western occult's dismissal of New Age concepts. Because it is 70% male, 30% female, as far as I can tell. I just think there's a little bit of misogyny in it too, which is a pity because, well, that's always a pity, but it's, in the case of mediumship, it's a pity because this is yours. Generally speaking, if you're listening to this show, I mean, 90% of the listeners are in Western countries. This is yours. There is no rules, or you're not going to get into that kind of like, oh, should I be here? Awkward appropriation thing. We had that conversation last time. I think that was quite good. You can have this. This is this is yours, and it is so worthwhile and life enriching to develop that. I don't want to say muscle, but to develop that muscle to get in a space where you can communicate with the unseen. And here is something that, and I suspect its time has come. I genuinely think where going to experience a specifically spiritualist mediumship fad is too cynical. Phase, let's call it that.
I'm really glad you mentioned how the occult, world is 70% men, 30% women, because we do live in a young, obsessed culture. Go, go, go! Bigger, better. Being from New York is a land of giant robot penises, according to Tina Fey, and she's absolutely right. And mediumship is so much about being on the receiving end of information. It's not the explosive, the explosive Kabbalah Solomonic ancient. It's quiet. It's subtle. It's quiet, subtle, receptive, and I believe, therefore, in our culture, easily pushed aside for, especially in a world that disempowers us so much. And we are therefore hungry for power because we have been disempowered, and no one has taught us or told us what our personal powers are, to then be adults and have lived this way for so long. It's so easy to get stuck in addiction to intensity.
Addiction to intensity, very cool. Yeah.
Because we need it so badly. We are so hungry for that which is rightfully ours, but so much abstraction has been set up to keep us exploited and separate from that which is ours. So much, and even that comes down to mediumship, and why you are making it such a point of saying this is because so much abstraction has been put in the way of people understanding the value of this of this technique and what using it will do.
Absolutely. And people's first thoughts are like, gosh, I'm assuming the first thing people are thinking is, and we'll turn it into a question, isn't that dangerous? And you go, well, arguably, it's dangerous not to in the 21st century. I don't understand how people can get to the end of their lives without the stuff we've been talking about, Kai. So that's always been my perspective, like, isn't that dangerous? I'm like, well, you are already possessed. That's where we open this conversation. Quite likely. You're at least partially possessed.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually one of the things I want to talk about I have 2 classes coming up. One is Introduction to Energy Hygiene, in which I'll be positing that idea that you are already partially possessed. Let's start there, because I think that's a game changer, worldview-wise. And the other one is Trance, Mediumship, and Divination, to help equip people with the kind of skills that I've been able to acquire over the years from deep engagement with the symbolic world around myself. I will say that one of the first experiences of spirit contact I ever had was when I was baby pagan, and I was at college, and I wasn't in charge of, I don't think I was in charge of the pagan group at that time. I think someone else was. It was Samhain time, and we brought pictures of our beloved dead and laid them on the altar, and I brought pictures of my great-grandparents and my maternal grandmother and lay them on the altar. Now, my maternal grandmother I wasn't particularly close to, not as close as I was to my great-grandparents, who I was lucky to have in my life till I was about 12, 13 years old. But I remember I sat down and just, dumb suppered for a while and passed around meat or wine or something. I remember suddenly hearing the very guttural laugh of the maternal grandmother and smelling what her kitchen was like. And I'm not someone who's very good at recalling faces fully. Usually when I think of someone, in my mind's eye, they're very blurry. And in my mind's eye, her face was totally clear. And I could smell her and her home. And I was thinking, this is insane, because if she's the last person I expected to come through if anything happened. And I wasn't really expecting anything to happen, but here was this visceral, multi-sensory experience of this woman who was no longer here, and it became a crucial point on the journey of self-trust for me. As I would look at something and, say, some exercise that was explicitly not about manifest your will, but was like, go do this path working to meet XYZ deity or helping spirit. And you don't want to do it because you're thinking to yourself, I know I'm just going to get up, but I really feel like I should do it. It was one of those crucial moments of, no, there's something here. There's something about the unseen, and my ability to engage with it and interpret it and be with it as it is. And I can reach back to this Samhain moment to say that I'm on the right path and I can do this.
It's fascinating. I have a similar story, except it was with a maternal grandfather. And when you say you're coming back to it to say, I know this is real and I can do this, once you've had the experience the first time that you can't deny of essentially communicating with a dead human in your head, there's you know you can do it, right? This is a thing, you can do it, and that's very healing, because even we spoke about the prevailing worldviews and how we don't construct anything very good with prevailing worldviews, but we don't construct thoughts and people and so on in a worldview of materialism with no interiority to matter, for instance. So even if people are open to this idea, they will, in the first place, think they're making it up, and they may well be. That certainly happens when people start on active imagination and so on, because they're terrified of getting it wrong or it not working. And but once you've had it, once it happens once, it's not like it's off to the races after that. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, let's be honest. But once
Absolutely.
You know that you can talk to spirits of the dead in your head, game-changing.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Kai, you mentioned a couple of courses, because I would have loved to have. I'm going to let you go. Mediumship be fun to talk about, but what do you got going on? There's a few courses and things. I've kept you for long enough. Lay it on the people, particularly the soul retrieval and mediumship stuff.
Well, I am teaching a class on Introduction to Energy Hygiene, maintaining personal power through shamanic technologies. I have a background both in folk magic and shamanism, as well as the African diasporic traditions, and it is really through ways in which spiritual cleansing and protection and energetic and entity possession, because to me those are different energy and entities, and to me making sense of the difference of those is very powerful when it comes to our ability to maintain personal power. We're going to be exploring all of these things and looking at the dynamic between ourselves and the world, and what that means in terms of being a responsible spiritual adult. Do we need our diaper changed, or do we know how to, use the toilet and take care of ourselves, and to spread responsible stewardship of our energy bodies and that of our homes to others. I think that having a good understanding of energy hygiene is vital to spiritual adulthood. The idea that we leave this off for someone else to figure out for us, as I think is very, very popular in the magical and occult communities, is, to me, coming back to that materialistic psychosis. And it's vital that we have an understanding of the unseen parts of us and how they can be well and how they need to be well. And the other class is Trance, Mediumship, and Divination. I've taught this class before. It's one of my favorite things to teach. I love helping people trust themselves and engage their psychic antenna in all kinds of ways. It's I would say in some ways it's an overview class, but because it's 12 weeks, it's deeply in depth to really strengthen skills across a host of divinatory and trance modalities and techniques, as well as gain some understanding of one's own helping spirits along the way, because it's all about people having tools for after they work with me. And then you can email me and ask me questions, and we can be friends on Facebook and have a jolly old time.
Nice. Well, where do people go to find out about that? Where do they find you on these internets?
On these internets, you can find me in the locale known as impactshamanism.com.
Nice one. And that and all the other details will, of course, be in the show notes. Well, it was lovely to chat again. It went quick. I can't believe it's been like almost 2 years. Crazy.
Thank you so much for having me again, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Much thought food for you to digest over the next week there. And if you're idly wondering why, or even if, disparate topics like Wetiko and mediumship go together, let me show you some of my own working on that. Whether you think the times are actually getting worse, or that we've reached the stage of a long-running viral infection where the symptoms are now found everywhere and are impossible to ignore, or whether you think it's both, strategically, the best course of action is to take the fight to where it's weakest, or otherwise described, to treat the actual virus rather than the symptoms. The weak spot for a non-physical infection that only believes in the physical is inevitably the non-physical. I touch on this in Pieces of 8, but the enemy, capitalized, is the delusion that only the material is material. That delusion can be knocked over with a feather. Everything after that, panpsychism, animism, Neoplatonism, whatever, is in some sense quibbling over the remaining 5% of the challenge, however fun that is to do. And we really do have endogenous practice emerging out of Western culture for all its many flaws that are universally available to anyone and waiting for you right now. By all means, embark on the challenging and rewarding journey of exploring more complex or harder to find modes of spirit interaction. But don't let those longer journeys stop you or delay you when you have methods available to you right now, right in front of you. One final medical analogy may be useful to illustrate the point. If you have a heart attack on the street and you fall into the bus lane, you are at that moment dying of two things. Yes, you'll want some assistance with that heart attack fairly soon and to commence treatment for your heart disease, but you really need to get yourself out of the bus lane. Don't let long-term goals get in the way of immediate needs. So that's the show for this week. If it's your jam, please do subscribe in your favorite podcatcher or on YouTube. Find us at runesoup.com or the Runesoup Facebook page, and find me on Twitter where I am Gordon, Gordon_White, WHITE. Until next time.